Persian, Russian, Mandarin well enough to go on Al Jazeera or the Russian or Chinese equivalents and articulate our policy as well as you did here today?
You mean actually speak those languages?
Yes.
I don't know. That's a lot of Rosetta Stone we have to buy. I'd like to speak more languages than two, you know, but I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the good news is that all these news entities that you've outlined all have English language platforms and allow us to communicate. The good news is that, you know, we're still so influential in the world that people care what happens here in D.C. It's hard for me to believe that, but you know, you'll sign a letter on an issue and you'll get a phone call from an embassy. They care. It matters. You know, I'd imagine that, you know, the same issue taken up in some other parliament or Congress may not be nearly as important. I think more important is that we're clear about where we are and how important we care about these issues. I'll give you one example of a place where I hope it'll make a difference, and it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, was Bahrain. You know, and so we have this conflict. On the one hand, we have this incredible ally who's been so helpful to us. On the other hand, they have this unsustainable internal situation where ultimately, because their leadership and their majority are so, you know, imbalanced, that you can see how this thing plays out over time and why it's a prime breeding ground for Iran and other countries to come in and stir up problems for them. So if you're your ally, if you have a friend, you go to a friend and say, hey, you know, we're very grateful for your friendship, but the political situation you have internally is unsustainable, and you should start addressing it now, because if you don't start addressing it now, eventually there's going to be a problem. And what you do with friends sometimes is you try to go to them and create, you know, some leverage in order to do it. And so I think I was the only Republican that did this, signed a letter asking the administration not to cancel, but simply to postpone a pending arms sale with them until an internal report came out that outlined, you know, what may have been potential abuses during the protests. That report just came out. And in all fairness, it was a pretty frank and brutal indictment of themselves in terms of what happened, how protesters were treated, et cetera. Now they have to act on that. But what does that do? First of all, I think that gives us credibility to go back to some of the, you know, dissident and opposition movements in the country and say, hey, you know, listen, we spoke up for your ambitions, but you've got to come to the table and work with a government, particularly a crown prince, that's open to you know, to saving your national identity and preventing an eventual Mubarak-style type conflict that then puts you in a no-win situation. So I think that that's something that we need to speak out on, because people pay attention to that. Because the first question you'll get in the Middle East is, you guys say you're for democracy, but you look the other way in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and places like that. And the answer is those countries are not going to go from what they are now to constitutional republics in 48 hours or in 2 years. But what we hope is that they're on a road towards progressing, towards a more sustainable political climate. That means that they don't become ample, fertile breeding grounds for anti-Americanism, but also for radical jihad and for things of that nature, where people have an outlet for their ambitions and their aspirations. And with a friend like Bahrain, you try to encourage them down that road and do what you can to get them to make progress. And I hope we'll be able to do that there. And I think that's important that people understand in those platforms that you asked me about.
Yes. It's going to get you the microphone here.
Hi, Jonathan Broder from Congressional Quarterly. Do you agree with Newt Gingrich, the front-runner in the Republican presidential race, that the Palestinians are an invented people?
Well, he has a historical perspective on it that I haven't carefully studied in order to make pronouncements like that. I think the point he was trying to make is that the claims on the region, I don't want to speak for him, you're going to have to ask him exactly what he meant. Let me tell you my perspective of it. And I've always been wary of defending what other people say or criticizing what other people say, because he provided that in the context I'm not aware of, and he's much more of a historian than I am in terms of the Ottoman Empire and all these sorts of things. Let me just say this. I think that the Palestinian claims on the region are based on the notion that Jews have no historical ties to Israel or the land that now is Israel. And I reject that wholeheartedly. I think that there's extensive historical ties between the Jewish people and the land. I think it's important to recognize that the United Nations and the community of nations established Israel in the aftermath of World War II as a place for the Jewish people to have a homeland. And I think his point is, and I think certainly my point would be, that the notion that somehow the Jewish people have no historical tie to the land, that in fact that land has always belonged to somebody else, and that the Jews are folks that have come there from Europe and other parts of the world and taken it over and expelled the people who have a rightful claim to the land, is one that I reject categorically. I think it's false. And I think we all would hope that in our lifetime we will see a region where both Palestinians and Jews could live side by side in their own homelands. But I think that all begins with a recognition that the Jews are entitled to a homeland, that they're entitled to their country in that region. And until you have And I think if that is established, if we could get to that point, I think there are a lot of things that are possible. I think the Israelis have said that repeatedly, that they would be willing to figure out all sorts of accommodations. And by the way, let me just say this, and I know that this is largely a pro-Israel crowd, so I'm not just saying to cater to you, but I visited Israel for the first time last year. What I was most struck with is the access that all religions have to Jerusalem. As a Christian, I never felt that somehow I was in a country that was unwelcoming to Christians. Muslims have holy sites there that they have full access to. Clearly Jews do as well. I'm appreciative of the role that Israel has played in allowing the holy sites within their country to be available to all faiths. They've been extraordinary caretakers of that legacy and of the archaeology associated with it. That may sound strange to you, but some of the history that is yet to be discovered in that region, the painstaking care they've taken to be protective of that, above and beyond politics, is something I appreciate as well. But I think the fundamental issue behind the speaker's statements was about whether the Jewish people have a historical claim to that land, and I believe that they do. It's just as strong, if not stronger, than anybody else.
Yes, sir, over here.
Ed Ross, EW Ross International. I have two questions for you. Number one, where do you stand on F-16 sales to Taiwan in the context of China?
I support that.
Okay. And second, you said you don't want to be on the ticket.
You knew
what are you
you'd
going
get
to
a
do
question
after
like
the
that.
Republican nominee is chosen and the ticket's chosen? How hard are you going to campaign for the Republican ticket?
As hard as I can. I think it's that important of an election. I mean, the most important foreign policy, this is a foreign policy group, the most important foreign policy measure we could undertake is to restore this country. The American example, by and large, to get our affairs in order is the #1 thing we can do to make the world a better place. Everything else stems from that. And I believe that if we have 4 more years of the current administration, you'll have a government's role in our economy that you won't recognize. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I do because I think that this administration has adopted, or maybe has always had, fully embraced an ideology that somehow the only way that some people in this country can become more prosperous is for other people to become less prosperous. And in my opinion, that runs counter to everything that's made this nation different. What made America, that's the view almost all the world has, that the only way you can do better is if he does worse. And the American way has been, we can both do better. And it's not a zero-sum game. In fact, we can grow this economy so prosperous that you can remain prosperous and new people can become prosperous right alongside you. That separates us from the rest of the world. We're about to lose that because we're being told by this president that the choice is the only way that you're going to be able to do better is if we, the government, step in and make sure other people have less. And the day we adopt that as our national policy economically, not only will America be diminished, but our ability to influence the world through our example will be diminished as well. So I'll do everything I can to make sure somebody new is in the White House.
Take one more question. Yes, over here, right here.
John Bonig. Senator Rubio, I know from I heard that the economic situation in Iran is getting tough and all that. Do you think that the economic situation is going to force them sooner or later to make a decision on what to do with the nuclear program? And do you think also...
Talking about Iran, I'm sorry?
Yeah, Iran.
Yeah.
And also, do you think they were offered a new type of like a reactor that didn't use or produce the problems with the nuclear material for use for bombs? Do you think they might decide to take it, or how would you proceed?
No, I mean, I think their decision about acquiring a nuclear capability is about having influence. I mean, why does North Korea have a nuclear capability? Because they want to wipe out South Korea? No, because people have to deal with them. Otherwise, they'd be ignored. This is the way people get attention now. And that's the way these countries have decided. I mean, the first wave of nuclear nations was, you know, the Cold War element of it and post-World War II. The second was these regional conflicts, Pakistan, India, etc. And now you have this third wave, which is we get a nuclear weapon so that we matter, so that you have to listen to us, so you have to do what we want you to do. And that's the case of North Korea, and that's the case of the Iranian program, is they want to use that as a way to leverage and influence the region, to have basically power over their neighbors, because they'll have not just the weapon, but the mechanisms to deliver it. And then the added threat to Israel that you don't have in, the added threat in Iran that you don't have in North Korea is there is a religious ideological underpinning that really would make them heroes in their minds if they wipe out the Jewish state. And, you know, we can say, oh, that's just talk. People talk big, but they really would never do that. I mean, these guys, think about what they were about to do. They were about to set off a bomb in Cafe Milano in Georgetown. They wanted to pay somebody to kill a Saudi ambassador in this city. These are not normal people we're dealing with. These are not your neighbors. These are not, you know, Western-style diplomats that we're engaging with. When they talk about blowing things up, they mean that. And they have people all over the world figuring out ways to do that.